It's certainly not something Mark Carney's elbows up crowd wants to hear. But when you look at all types of measures of this new Liberal Prime Minister, he is failing and receives a failing grade. Everywhere from immigration to trade to Canada's economy, things are not going well. Hello, I'm Adrian Batra. With me are Warren Kinsella and Brian Lilley. It's harsh. And I know Brian, he's only been prime minister for a hot minute, but there were big expectations. It's not like he hasn't been around the Liberal government for a while. He certainly was Justin Trudeau's advisor for many years. He came in with this big promise, Brian, that we're going to get a trade deal done. And 1 week after the deadline passes, still no trade deal with the United States. A big failure.
Not only no trade deal, but not even indication of when he will speak to Donald Trump.
Mhm.
Mark Carney called Trump prior to the deadline of August 1st, and Trump didn't return his call. That's something that the White House has confirmed, but it's also something that Trump's team has confirmed, with Dominic LeBlanc saying on CBS last weekend, well, we hope that they'll speak in coming days. Where are they with that now? Apparently, they will speak in coming days. When was the last time they spoke? June 26th. That was the day where Trump was saying to Carney, you got to hold off on implementing this digital services tax. Just give us a 30-day pause on it while negotiations for a deal are ongoing. And we said, no, elbows up. We're going to implement this tax. The next day, Trump said, all talks with Canada are off. By the Sunday, just 2 hours before the tax was supposed to take effect, Carney announced that he was rescinding it. On issue after issue, he's handled this file
Mhm.
horribly. And I'm judging by results, nothing else. This is what are the results showing us? Mexico got a 90-day extension. Every other G7 country other than Canada has some form of a deal with the Americans. So for all these people saying, well, you can't negotiate with a lunatic and a maniac, other countries are able to do it. And one last point before I hand it back, as Mark Carney might say. Um, in March, uh, Doug Ford was down in Washington to meet with Howard Lutnick. Remember, he had said, I'm going to shut off all the power to the US.
Mhm.
And the White House said, you got to get down here. So he goes down for a meeting with Howard Lutnick. Dominic LeBlanc and Frankie Bubbles, Francois Philippe Champagne, are in the meeting with Ford. And they hear Lutnick and Jameson Greer say, look, these tariffs are coming April 2nd. You're not going to stop them. But Canada is a priority as soon as we start doing deals after April 2nd. They all heard that. And then we were very close to a deal at the end of May, beginning of June, and somehow things fell apart. And now we can't get calls returned. Everyone else is getting deals, and we've gone from a priority to we're not even going to call them back. And when you come to Washington, you're going to meet with the B and the C team.
Yeah, Warren, I feel that the three of us have done some iteration of this conversation for the last 2 to 3 months. I'm sure Brian's getting tired of writing nearly the same column over and over again, but it is so critical um, as we see things happening in the United States economy. $600 billion investment by Apple just the other day, where they're going to manufacture new iPhones back in the United States. And then we in Canada are saying, okay, elbows up, still insane, elbows up. We need to look beyond the US for other trade deals with countries all around the world. Yet, we're not even doing what these countries want from Canada. We're not unleashing that Canadian economy. So I'm wondering. i- People will say, "Oh, it's grossly unfair to say Carney's being hasn't succeeded. You can't negotiate with Trump." But as Brian pointed out, other countries have. They put their heads down. They didn't use this rhetoric like we're shutting off the power. We're going to retaliate. They just put their heads down, got a deal done, and moved ahead. What is the holdup with Canada?
I think it's where the holdup is what interests me, and I've got a column about this in our paper this weekend, which is, I looked at, it is the early days, as you say, of this government, And he's clearly being given a break by the Canadian people. You see it in the polling. He's the preferred prime minister. His party's way ahead, and so on. But, there is a litany of failure there, starting with the tariff story. This is the guy, he did this himself. He raised an expectation that he couldn't satisfy, and that's breaking the cardinal Chrétien rule, and I know that because I work for Chrétien. You never raise an expectation you can't satisfy. You undersell and overperform. So on tariffs, we were sent home with our tails between our legs, while the rest of the world, as you guys point out, have some kind of a deal. They're not immune. They're all been hit with tariffs as of last night, but Canada is in a worse position comparatively. You look at the Palestine story, where he recognizes Palestine in September in exchange for some magic beans that, Hamas is not going to be around anymore, and it's not going to be in power, and there's going to be reforms. Nobody on the ground there, on the Israel side or the Hamas side, actually believes that. And then you look at Mexico this week, he dispatches Anita Anand to Mexico, and she says even before Anand shows up in Mexico City, there's not going to be any separate trade deal with Canada.
Right.
And by the way, Mexico has been given an exemption from tariffs. So there's a real litany of failure there. This has been, a real letdown, more sizzle than steak. And I find it fascinating that Canadians haven't caught up to that in the polling. They're still giving him the benefit of the doubt. That says to me, my political experience says, sometime in the fall, when they realize that things are actually not going that swimmingly, the bottom could fall out for the prime minister very quickly.
Pierre Poilievre could very well be back in Parliament by the time it resumes, if he's successful in the by-election in a few weeks' time in Alberta. That will also have political impact when you have that strength of the opposition leader going after the prime minister in the House of Commons. That certainly will have an impact. But ultimately, as Canadians, Brian, we need this prime minister to succeed. We need him to, open up our economy, look at other jurisdictions. But in the words of the failure, that still isn't happening. And is it because Carney continues to be surrounded by the same cast of characters that did the same thing with Trudeau? I mean, does Carney think he's the smartest guy in the room? What's happening here?
Well, I think there's probably a little bit of that. And look, I've been complimentary to this government on some of their domestic policies and critical on the international. But I'm tired of being called a traitor for saying, look, we're not doing the right things on these files. And there's an awful lot of Canadians, like to Warren's point on why he's doing well in polling, there's an awful lot of Canadians that still just want to yell elbows up and F Trump.
Hmm.
And, they're like the people going around with the F Trudeau flags on their homes or the backs of their trucks. They're just angry and want to be angry at the guy. Well, okay, let's pause for a minute and say, what is actually happening? Should we be doing something different? And yes, we should be. When I listened to Donald Trump's speech on Inauguration Day, that's when a penny dropped for me. And I went, okay, this is well beyond tariffs. This guy is going to fundamentally change the world economic order, the global trading order. And we are not up to speed on
That's
that.
right.
And so, yeah, we're doing Bill C5. That is just a sliver of what we should be doing. Danielle Smith, Alberta's premier, is right. We should be repealing Bill C-69, the No More Pipelines Act, that also impacts mining, that also impacts every kind of natural resource project. We are a natural resources driven country and economy. We should be unleashing that, and we're not. Should we be looking at trade deals outside? Yeah, but we've also got to be smart about that. Sending Francois Philippe Champagne and Anita Anand to Mexico, and acting as if this is going to replace what we're doing with the United States. We do over $1 trillion a year in trade with the US. Do you know what our two-way trade with Mexico is? It's about $50 billion. That's a drop in the bucket. Stephen Harper went around the world and took us from having, I believe it was 5 free trade deals when he took office. It was 5 or 6 when he took office in 2006. By the time he left, we had free trade deals with 51 countries. But some of them, like in the EU, there's still 10 countries that haven't ratified. You know what one of the issues is? Dairy. Why don't we have a free trade deal with Britain? Dairy. Britain left the EU and they'd been exporting British cheddar to us. And suddenly, because they need their own trade deal, our dairy lobby goes in and says, no, you can't keep exporting the same amount of cheese to us as you did before. We don't want any of your cheese. And so we have no trade deal with Britain, of all places. Again, sometimes we are stupid. Sometimes we cut off our nose to spite our face. Pointing that out does not make me a traitor. That makes me someone standing up for the people who are potentially losing their jobs. And that's what I care about. Who's going to lose their jobs? The laptop class will be hit last. The folks who are retired, they can transfer their investments into an American index fund and not be, bloodied by all of this. But folks who are working in these industries that are being hit have to be worried. And Mark Carney is not delivering for those folks. Tristan Hopper had an interesting piece in National Post the other day. He looked at the polling, he looked at what Carney's doing, and he said the only people that Carney are pleasing are seniors. He's still popular with the 55 plus crowd. With everyone else, he's tied with the conservatives.
Warren, last word to you on this. Just a lot of decisions world leaders make are to project something domestically and another thing internationally. It would appear to me that the Carney liberals are doing this. We're trying to play tough guy with the Americans, still attempting to try to play tough guy with the Americans for a domestic audience. But what's happening with that very short-sighted view is it's going to hurt the country as a whole economically, as we've seen unemployment going rate continues to be high, our inflation continues to be high. We are seeing thousands of people lining up for probably a handful of jobs. We continue to not tame the immigration problems that we have had for many years now. And then we continue with the housing crisis, the shortage, cost of living. All these issues continue to happen. And I bring this up because these are domestic issues, but they have international consequences because Carney can't or won't get deals done and won't at the same time open up our own domestic markets for many of those domestic issues to be dealt with, Warren.
I think what has happened. I worked for Chrétien, and we had Stephen Harper, and Canada for many, many years, with many prime ministers, punched above our weight internationally.
Hmm.
And in the Justin Trudeau decade, he was good at winning elections, but militarily, economically, diplomatically, our reputation faded and diminished over the time that he was in power. And I think that's a big part of the reason why we're not getting deals on the economic front and so on, why we're miscalculating, as Brian pointed out a minute ago. Full disclosure, I campaigned for Kamala Harris. Every single day Donald Trump would talk about tariffs. He's always believed in tariffs.
Hmm.
As Brian pointed out, he spoke about it multiple times in his inauguration speech, and for some reason the Trudeau gang, who are still around Mark Carney, he still has a lot of their dregs, have persuaded him, oh, don't worry about it, it's going to be okay. Well, now we see it's not okay. We're grappling with tariffs that are harming our economy, harming the Canadians. And then we're hearing from the Premier of Ontario this week saying something I believe is true, which is Trump, we've benefited from the fact that we're exempt from tariffs on items that fall under the USMCA, the companies that did that paperwork. Well, now we're hearing from the Premier of Ontario, no less, that could be the next target. Like, if that happens, that is kind of end time stuff economically. And for sure, the American public, I was reading in the Times, I think this morning, that an economist there is saying it's like sand. It's not going to be a sudden shock to your American consumer. It's going to be like sand in the joint, and it's going to start to slow down the machinery of their economy. But in our case, the impact, the shock is going to be much more sudden and much more profound because, close to 90% of our trade was with the United States. So there's been a miscalculation. There's been some predictions about behavior that have been made in Ottawa about Washington and the EU and the Middle East, and those calculations are wrong. And I really fear what the impact is going to be on your average Canadian.
Well, it bears repeating that Canada's economic problems started way before Donald Trump became president. And frankly, Mark Carney still hasn't gotten it done. Well, like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel and go to the torontosun.com. You'll find commentary and coverage there you'll not find anywhere else.